Tonight, a special edition of On the Docket. Domestic violence. It can be a silent killer that millions of people fall victim to every day. How do some people break the cycle of violence while others endure the abuse? An amazing woman with an amazing story of survival and salvation. Valerie Miller joins us exclusively with her story and an exclusive interview, and we'll talk about what she's doing to save others. Then, down and out, Republican presidential candidate Herman Cain bows out of the primary race. He says he's at peace with his God and his wife, but can Republicans find peace ahead of the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primaries just 1 month away? We'll take a look at some surprising new poll numbers released on Sunday. Then in sports, Sandusky speaks again, and more charges against the disgraced defensive coach for Penn State. Today, more charges coming from the grand jury as 2 more victims have now come forward. The former Penn State defensive coordinator, facing 42 counts of child molestation, sits down with another interview with the New York Times, this time 4 hours. We'll tell you what he confirmed for victims and investigators in his own words, and the latest on the FAMU hazing scandal. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement steps in to protect the criminal investigation into drum major Robert Champion's death. We'll have the latest. Good evening, everyone. I'm Felix Vega, and welcome to On the Docket. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Apologize for the late start. We had a couple of things we need to do here in the studio, but we are going to go for the full hour. We have another great show for you tonight, beginning with an inspirational story of surviving domestic violence. Valerie Miller is our exclusive guest for most of the show as we talk about how she was able to escape a violent relationship and how she and other survivors are helping women build new lives. Then on our sports page, the Bucks collapse again, along with USF and the Bulls, while Tim Tebow is on fire with the Broncos. We'll also have the latest on the Penn State and FAMU scandals, as I mentioned, with more developments in both cases breaking over the weekend. That's all ahead in our second half hour. We'll also have the latest poll numbers in the Republican primary contest. One front-runner is out, and another rises to the top. And 2 new polls released on Sunday. Another poll released yesterday finds the same thing. With less than a month to go before voters go to the polls in Iowa and New Hampshire, we're going behind the numbers. And you'll want to stick around finally for a recap of some of the bizarre legal headlines from across the country in this week's installment of You Can't Make This Stuff Up. A heinous double shooting on a bus in New York, a Sarasota murder caught on video, male prostitutes in New Jersey, the naked truth of crime, literally. We've got it all covered for you in our last segment. But first, we want to get caught up on today's top stories here on the docket. Ousted Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich learned his fate today as he was sentenced after his second trial on federal corruption charges in Chicago. The governor stood trial twice for charges stemming from a scheme to effectively sell Barack Obama's Senate seat after Obama was elected president in 2008. Federal Judge James Zagel rejected defense arguments on Tuesday that Blagojevich was a minor player in the whole scheme and sentenced him to 14 years in prison. Some of the things that Blagojevich and his defense team told Zagel simply didn't buy, foremost of which was that Blagojevich was a minor player in the entire scheme, but not, in fact, was the case according to prosecutors. Blagojevich told the judge that my life is ruined, at least for now. His political career was over. He can't be a lawyer anymore. A lot of stuff that he said really didn't catch on with the judge. The judge didn't follow the recommendation necessarily of federal prosecutors of 15 to 20 years, but as I said, did give him 14 years. After being governor, Blagojevich was used to making a 6-figure salary. Now he's just going to be making 12 cents an hour in federal custody. And since he got sentenced to more than 10 years, he will be serving his time in an actual federal prison, not a federal prison camp. Now on to the Occupy Tampa movement. It was pretty much dismantled to some degree over the last week. 29 protesters were arrested Friday morning after they refused to leave Curtis Hickson Park once again. After being warned by police that they would be arrested, those protesters refused, locking arms and leaving them no choice but to arrest the protesters for trespassing and resisting without violence. Both of those are misdemeanors. And New Yorkers are claiming that the Occupy Wall Street movement in Manhattan has taken NYPD officers off the streets in some dangerous neighborhoods in other boroughs. New York Post reported Sunday that Harlem residents complained that officers were noticeably absent on their streets following a string of shootings. NYPD officials say they were forced to divert resources to protesters in Zuccotti Park in downtown New York. Harlem residents weren't buying that excuse, according to the Post, though, pointing to the fact that occupiers were tossed out of the park on November 15th. Police in other parts of the country, like Oakland, Seattle, and Washington, D.C., have clashed with protesters in recent weeks, some turning violent. Here in Tampa, about 60 people have been arrested over the past month. Over now to Pinellas County, the videotaped confession of accused cop killer Nicholas Lindsay will be shown to jurors when his trial gets underway, now scheduled to begin sometime in 2012. Judge Thane Covert ruled that Lindsay's constitutional rights were not violated after he was read the standard Miranda warnings when Lindsay was brought in for questioning the day after police say he shot and killed Officer David Crawford in downtown St. Pete. Defense attorneys argued that Lindsay's parents became police agents when they were brought in during their son's questioning and that they asked for an attorney. Judge Covert said he would hold status hearings every 3 weeks from here on out to keep the case on track for trial sometime early next year. And that's one story we'll actually be covering here on the docket as it unfolds. On our international watch, election results are still being counted in Egypt after the country's first elections were held last Monday. The first democratic elections held since the uprising that ousted President Hosni Mubarak in February. Early results showed candidates backed by the controversial Muslim Brotherhood group appear to be making big gains in the parliament race. Presidential elections will be held later this year. And in an unprecedented move Tuesday, President Barack Obama urged all U.S. agencies to promote gay rights on the international level by re-examining foreign aid payments to countries that criminalize homosexuality. The new initiative will be led by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and the State Department. In a speech delivered in Geneva Tuesday, Secretary Clinton outlined the president's directive declaring that it should never be a crime, quote, to be gay anywhere in the world. Although many countries in Europe and around the world allow same-sex marriage, many others do not. For example, in Afghanistan and Iran, engaging in homosexual activity is actually punishable by death. Although the sweeping policy is arguably the boldest support of gay rights by the administration, President Obama has faced criticism by gay rights organizations for not supporting same-sex marriage in the United States. In financial news, the markets here in the U.S. today finished up mostly. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, was up more than 46 points to close out at 12,196. NASDAQ was down just under a point to 2649 and change. Oil prices remained pretty much the same over the past day. They settled in at $100.82. The Nikkei average in Japan was up 147 points. And in our market takeaways real quick today, unemployment was down to 8.6% last month, adding the government saying that the economy added about 120,000 new jobs. The devil was always in the details when we talk about unemployment because 300,000 people actually stopped looking for a job in the last month, and that is causing a lot of controversy in Washington as to whether or not the numbers are actually accurate and whether Democrats versus Republicans are telling the truth when they interpret the numbers. The truth is, both sides are actually telling the truth. Now it's up to the voters come November to decide how they're going to interpret that information as we head into our election year in 2012. Now for your on-the-docket forecast, it warmed up considerably since last Friday with highs in the 80s this week, but a front is passing through actually right now. It's a little cold, a little rainy outside, and tonight that will bring temperatures back to a much more seasonal level. Lows tonight will be in the 40s, while highs tomorrow and Friday will be in the upper 60s and low 70s. More pool weather coming up this weekend. And at 5:32, you're up to date with all the latest news here on the docket, but we want to hear from you throughout the hour. Post a message on our Facebook fan page at facebook.com/onthedocket. Follow me on Twitter at Felix Vega News, and you can also email me at felixveganews@aol.com. So with that, we want to jump right into our first segment tonight on the docket, surviving domestic violence. Now, did you know that in every 9 seconds in the U.S., a woman is assaulted or beaten? Around the world, at least 1 in every 3 women has been beaten, coerced into sex, or otherwise abused during her lifetime. Most often, the abuser is a member of her own family. Did you also know that domestic violence is a leading cause of injury to women, more than car accidents, muggings, and rapes combined? Domestic violence victims lose nearly 8 million days of paid work per year. In the U.S. alone, the equivalent of 32,000 full-time jobs in this country. Around the world, reports from 10 countries indicate that between 55% and 95% of women who have been physically abused by their partners had never contacted a non-government organization such as a shelter or the police for help. The cost of intimate partner violence in the U.S. alone exceeded $5.8 billion per year. That's billion with a B. $4.1 billion for direct medical and healthcare services, and productivity losses account for nearly $1.8 billion of that total. And did you also know that men who as children witnessed their parents' domestic violence were twice as likely to abuse their own wives than sons of non-violent parents? That's information coming from the domesticviolencestatistics.org website, and I wanted to share those with you as we start off our conversation tonight with a very special woman that's here with us. Valerie Miller is a domestic violence survivor, and that's a term you're going to hear a lot from us tonight. After hiding her secret for years, Valerie finally broke her silence about her abuse in 2007 after she learned that her abuser had done the one thing Valerie feared would happen to her. He beat his girlfriend to death and was charged with murder. But Val has made some great strides in her recovery to emerge victorious, as she likes to say. Val, thank you so much for being here tonight. We just should tell our listeners we are going to post the full interview with you on our Facebook page, on the docket, also on our YouTube channel at Felix Vega News. But you've had so many accomplishments since you were, quote-unquote, a victim, and you describe yourself as a survivor. This was a tough decision you made about 4 years ago to start telling your story. Actually, and I have to say, I watched your DVD. There were several points where I was nearly brought to tears. And I want to start with one simple question as we get started here. Do you remember the first time that you were hit, and what did you think when that happened?
Yes, I do remember. But let me first say this. It started off verbally. He would make me feel unintelligent, ugly, and unworthy, but most of all guilty. He would tell me that it's my fault that this was happening to me. When it first happened, he slapped me, then he hit me in my face. He pushed me out of the way and walked off like it was nothing. I remember thinking, wow, what did I do to deserve that?
And how long had you been with him at that point when he first hit you?
It was only like a year. Only like a year I had been with him. And I remember thinking to myself, what did I get myself into? What was happening to the man that I married? I couldn't understand why things were changing.
Did you have children at this point?
Yes, I did. I had two.
How old were your children when this started?
The one was 1 year old and one was 3.
And once the violence started, I know the one thing that you talked about a lot in your DVD, and also you and I talked about, the violence only escalated over the years. What did that do to you emotionally?
Well, it tore me apart. You know, I lost my joy, I lost my peace of mind, my happiness, my self-esteem got really low. I was treated like trash, so I soon started thinking that I wasn't nothing but trash, you know.
And I think the most intriguing part is the whole story is that between yourself and also other domestic violence survivors, you feel like you blame yourself a lot of the times. Tell our listeners, why do you feel that way?
Well, he would make me feel that way. I kept thinking if I could only just be a good wife, a good mother, that things would be better. If I could only lose weight, maybe I could gain weight. Maybe I could put on more makeup or dress up. Things would get better, but it didn't. You know, it just got worse. And
what sort of things, you talked a lot about in your video about you, first off, before I get to our next question about hiding out and hiding from your family, describe what his behavior was like day in and day out.
Well, he started drinking more and more. He couldn't keep a job, so he started drinking more and more, and he just had so much anger built up. So I think he just took the anger out on me.
And did you know beforehand, or when he started hitting you, did you ever find out that if his mother was abused or anyone else in his family was abused while he was growing up?
Yes, his mother eventually told me that she was, you know, beat up. She was a victim herself by his father.
And what was her, this was an interesting thing you told me, what was her advice to you when you started telling her, or she discovered that your ex-husband at the time, was beating you. She had an interesting piece of advice that you actually tried to do, and it backfired.
Right. She told me to fight back, because I wasn't fighting back. I would just, let him do whatever he was doing. But she told me to fight back, and I remember trying that one night. I made up in my mind that night, if he come in and he jump on me, I was going to pick up something and knock him upside the head. And I tried that, and oh my God, it was worse. And
did that surprise you that was his mother's advice to you to try and survive this situation?
Yes. Yes, it was. Yes and no, because she was a fighter. She fought back. Mm-hmm. But so that part didn't really surprise me. But I just thought maybe she would give me advice on how to make things change, not to fight back and make things worse.
Yeah, and that was the surprising thing. I mean, right. When you told me that, now his mother found out, and I think you told me his sister found out, and some of his family members knew. What about your family? Did they ever suspect anything, or you talked a lot about it in your video, hiding all the time in your own house? Describe for us what that was like and why you chose to do that.
Well, I was trying. First of all, some members in my family didn't want me to marry him. First of all,
okay,
and so I felt ashamed. I was guilty. I felt guilty, and I didn't let my family members know. So a lot of times when they had barbecues or picnics or outings, I would just stay in the house, or I would, I isolate myself from everybody.
And we're not talking just like your injuries that you were trying to hide. We're not talking about like you were slapped or you got a scrape or something like that. We're talking you had black eyes, you had bruises, you were beaten severely. How did you go about hiding that from your own family and friends?
Well, I didn't. I just made excuses, and I just stayed in the house, and I wouldn't answer the door. Oh yeah, they would come to my door, knocking on the door, trying to get me to come to the door. I wouldn't answer the door. I would just act like I wasn't home. So it was hard for me to, isolate myself from my family, but I was ashamed.
And did you ever reach out to anyone in your family while all this was going on?
No, I didn't.
Looking back now, because I know you've really thought about this a lot over the past 3 or 4 years, and especially in the past year since you've gone public with this, looking back, why did you think you held back or you couldn't ask any of your family members?
I was scared for one reason. I was scared of him, because if he would have found out that I told somebody in my family and they would have confronted him, he probably would have really, about killed me. But I was really trying to make it work. I just kept thinking it would get better. I was just ashamed,
And how many years were you with him?
It was about 5-6 years.
And so that entire time, like you said, after the first year is when that was the first time that he hit you. Did you ever think that you could leave? Or, because I know one of the things that really struck me in your story is that you were actually beaten in front of your own children several times. Tell us about that and what went through your mind.
Well, oh my God, he would just, like you said, he would just beat me in front of the children, and they would be in the corners just crying and screaming, telling him to stop, and crying for me. And I was just, I don't know, I just wanted my kids to be safe. So I felt like as long as he was hurting me and not hurting the children, then it would be okay,
And so your focus was more on as long as he directed his anger towards you,
right, and not the children.
Right. That was okay with you. Mm-hmm. And you also told me another story about how you're beaten one night because he came home drunk. You had fallen. He woke you up and fell asleep. Tell us about that.
Well, he came home. It was like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I remember him telling me that something happened in the bar, or somebody stepped on his toe and they started a fight or something. And I fell asleep because, it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I think it was during the week also. And I remember waking up to him just beating me. saying that I disrespected him because I fell asleep while he was talking to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then that, and you talk about being woken up in the middle of the night and beaten in the middle of the night, and then you were working still. You weren't just a stay-at-home mom.
No, I was trying to work.
Tell us about what that was like when you were trying to, either you had a job or you're trying to keep a job. What impact did that take on your work life?
Well, I couldn't keep a job, I couldn't keep a job because I would call in a lot, making excuses that I was sick. I would have black eyes and bruises, so I was ashamed to go to work, and my coworkers and my boss would know what was going on, so I would call in and they would eventually let me go.
How many times did that happen?
Several. I can't even count how many times that happened.
And that was all within that 5-6 year period while you were married.
Right.
And one of the things that the statistics I pulled was that 8 million work days are lost per year because domestic violence victims, they can't go to work because they're beat up and they're trying to hide. Did you finally find a career and a job once all this ended, or how did you transition back in, or find stable work, so to speak?
Well, I just, after the divorce and everything, I did find one job that I stayed on a few years. That was like the longest job, and then now I'm currently working at the state attorney's office. In February will be 20 years that I've been on that job.
Wow!
So that is a great accomplishment.
That's
for
amazing.
me. Yes.
And just so people know, we've worked together.
Yes,
we've known each other for a very long time. You were actually, when I was a little intern, you were one of my secretaries.
I was your secretary. That's right.
And that's why it was very surprising to me, because I knew you. I think it was after all this had happened, but just to have you come forward with a story, and the little that you told me about it, and some of the things that you've done with your life since, just were so impressive that I wanted to share your story with everyone. Now, after this cycle of violence was going, what was the breaking point for you, and when did you feel like you had to make a decision if you were going to either survive, not get killed, not be beaten anymore, and get out of this relationship?
Well, it was the last time he beat me so bad. I had 2 broke ribs. One was fractured. Both of my eyes was blackened. My nose was bleeding. I had bruises everywhere. I was so sore. I had to drive myself to the hospital. I'm crying. My eyes half shut. I can't hardly see. Went to the hospital. When I got there, I had to tell the nurses and the doctors what had happened to me. And of course, they had to call the police because, by it being a domestic violence case, they called the authorities. And one of the officers was a female officer that went to school with my sisters and my cousins. And so she knew me. I didn't really know her, but she knew me. And she gave me a list of numbers that I could call to get help and get assistance for me and my children's shelters and programs. And she told me that I didn't deserve the things that were happening to me, and that I come from a good family. And that was it for me. I knew I couldn't go on like that. I was either gonna kill him or he was gonna kill me. I was gonna end up either in the crazy house because I thought I was losing my mind. I just knew I had to make a decision, and my decision that day was enough is enough. I couldn't take it any longer.
And one of the things you remembered was some advice that your mother had given you all your life, and was about prayer and also asking God for help.
Right.
And what was that like? Did that, on top of that officer who, for all intents and purposes probably saved you,
right?
How did turning to God and taking your mom's advice to heart really kind of push you over the edge and get you back on a good path?
Well, like I said, my mom, she didn't know what was going on, but I just remember her telling me, because I was real sad one day over to her house, and she told me, she said...
Is this after the incident in the hospital?
No, this was before.
Okay.
But things were going on then.
Right.
But I never told her. But I remember her telling me, whatever is wrong with you, you can cry out to God. She said that it's a scripture in the Bible that said God will never leave you nor forsake you, and he'll always be there for you. So I couldn't understand, where was God during all those times when I was crying? I'm sorry.
It's okay.
When I was crying out to him, all those nights when I felt so alone, I couldn't understand that. So I decided to take my mom's advice, and I cried out to God, and I said, God, if you are here and you hear me, I need you to help me. This is when I was in the hospital. I said, I need you to help me, and I need you to rescue me out of this situation that I'm in, because I can't take it any longer. And I have to take care of my children and protect my children. So I need you to come into my life, and I need you to rescue me and deliver me and save me out of this situation. And he did that. He did that for me. And my advice is, I know that we're going to get to that later, but my advice is that they can call out to God and ask for help, because if he did it for me, he can do it for you.
And when you made that realization and you let go and you realized that it wasn't your fault, you had to make a decision to leave your husband. Mm-hmm. How did he react?
Wow. Well, during that time, we was already separated. So he went to jail after that incident.
Okay.
Like a few days later, they picked him up. So he was in jail. During the time he was in jail, I took advantage of it, and I filed for a divorce. The day that he got the divorce papers, he was so angry. He came to the apartment, and he bammed and knocked and screamed at the door for me to open the door. So I got my kids, and I laid them on the floor, because I didn't know if he was going to kick the door in or what. So I had them on the floor. He was crying. They were crying, and they were screaming and hollering. And so after I wouldn't open the door, he went around to the window and just started throwing whatever he could find, rocks, bricks, trees, branches, whatever he could find in the window.
Literally trying to break in the house.
Yes, he was. He was trying to get in there. He was trying to get to me. So then at that point, I called the police, and I don't know what stopped him from doing, that, but he was walking down the street, and the police picked him up that same night.
Wow.
They picked him up. So he was very, very angry. But at the divorce hearing, he didn't even show up. So the judge gave me everything that I asked for, everything that I wanted.
Luckily
it was
for
given
you,
to me. Yeah.
And was that pretty much the last that you had contact with him, or were there other instances where he tried to get back with you, or
oh yeah,
for lack of better, trying to woo you back into the situation? Mm-hmm. What was that like for you? I mean, you knew that you had already had to get out of this situation, and if he tried to get a hold of you, what would you do, and how would you react?
Well, I hid from him a lot, I moved and wouldn't let him know where I moved from, to. But the hardest thing was that I had a child from him. So, my child would want to see him, or she would want to, well, not actually want to see him, but she would want to see her grandmother and his family. So I would take him around there. So whenever I did see him, he would try to, get back with me or whatever. But I wasn't hearing that.
And I think that's an important message for women. They're in the situation so often. We see it, in the line of work that we do, where they go back and they go back and they go back, and it never, just like you said, it never gets better.
It never gets better.
One of the other things we talked about a little bit earlier before we started the show, your sister, you thought, knew beforehand what was going on, and she actually came to you and wanted to know if did you have the sign, so to speak, of an abused woman. What did that do to you?
Well, I denied it. I was ashamed, and it kind of surprised me that she knew, but she said I showed all the signs of abused wife or a battered wife. But it kind of surprised me that she knew, but she did know.
And did you eventually tell the rest of your family what was going on after the incident in the hospital and he got arrested?
I still didn't tell them yet. I still didn't tell them that. No, I still didn't. I didn't really tell them until years later. It still was years later.
But you'd already gotten divorced. And,
yeah, I had already gotten divorced and everything.
Basically started a new life, essentially.
Right.
One of the things that was very important to you that we always want to acknowledge is your current husband. You've been happily married for 19 years. And
no, 16
years.
16 years, but I've been with him 19 years.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And, yes, ma'am. And, you know, I look at you now and you're so, like, radiant and alive. And you told me that he was a big part in your recovery. Talk to us about that.
He was. Like I said before, my self-esteem was so low. So he helped it build back up. He told me I was beautiful. He told me I was worthy of love. He told me I was smart. And he helped me to raise my children without any help from my ex-husband. And now they're beautiful young women now with their own children. But my husband, he stood by my side. He was patient with me. Of course, he had to be patient with me, but he was very patient with me, and he was just so loving and caring. He always showed me that he loved me. He always showed me that he loved me, and he would never hurt me.
And there were times, I think you said, that you would either overreact or you would start to break down a little bit.
Yes.
Because that was the only way that you knew how to react for so long. What helped you, or what did he do to help you in those situations where you did have, you know, a moment of weakness, or you kind of went back to a darker place in your life?
He would just show me that I was loved and I was worthy and I was a good wife and I was a good person, and I wasn't that person that my ex-husband tried to make me feel like I was, you know. So yeah, it was a lot of times where he would just move his arm and I would jump like he was, you know, gonna hit me, but you know, he just would grab me and hold me and say, I'm not gonna hurt you, I'm here, I love you, you know. So he had a big part in it.
Now we talk about the big part of your recovery was actually starting to let go. You broke the silence, of course, with some of your family members, and I think you said in 2007 is when you first started to openly tell people. There was one thing that happened, I mentioned in the top of our intro, that you got a phone call one day, and that's when you decided that you needed to start telling people what happened. Tell us what happened.
Well, I got a phone call early one morning. I had just got to work from my daughter saying that, you know, her father had killed his girlfriend. And I just lost it. I felt bad for her, and then I just thought about that could have been me, you know. And I was like, wow, you know, I survived it. I feel bad for her. I didn't even know her, didn't even know her name. I felt bad for her and her family because she didn't survive it. But I survived it, and I just thank God, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here today. But I just lost it. I just lost it. I had to actually leave work that day. And
she was actually, you later found out, she was beaten severely and literally beaten to death by him. After that, do you remember who you reached out to first and finally told what you endured so many years? Or because we're now talking, this is a long time after the fact. How did you start telling people, and what did it feel like to finally get that off your chest?
Well, I remember calling my mom and telling my mom, and I remember telling her that he was doing that to me. You know, he was beating me and abusing me, And my mom was like, wow, why didn't you never tell us, And then I remember calling my dad and telling my dad that too. I just felt like I just had to break the silence and, and do something. It was just in my heart. I felt so bad for this girl that she didn't survive it. And I felt like I just had to get out there, and I just wanted to help all the victims of domestic violence some kind of way. And I didn't really know how I could do it, but I just wanted to do it some kind of way. So I was on the phone constantly calling all my family members and telling them what he did to me.
And out of this horrible, horrible situation that you endured for so many years, you've now done something extraordinary that you started doing for other women. Tell us about the ministry that you started. And I love the stories that you've told me about.
Yes.
What the women that are, it's not just you, there's other women that are involved.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Okay, we have this ministry called the Taliti Kumi Ministries, and what we actually do is we do a drama presentation. We actually relive our past to help somebody else that's in the same situations that we were in. The first one is 4 presenters. The first one is domestic violence, which is physical and emotionally abuse, that I present. And then we have another lady that present the sexually abused prostitution that she had in her past. And then emotional abuse and grief, we have another lady that present that. And then the last but not least is the drug and alcohol abuse. We have a lady that present that as well. And what we do is we present that, and we do a skit that we're in that situation right then. And then we have an angel that comes in and take us out of that situation and leads us to the Lord. And then we all come back and we tell our story of recovery on how we got out of that situation, how God brought us out, and what is happening with us now.
That's just so inspiring
awesome.
And amazing.
Yes.
And the groups that you go to when you present, do this entire presentation, what sort of groups are you targeting? Where are you going to I think you mentioned you've gone to prisons and jails to do that.
Well, we haven't went to the prison yet. We're going there soon.
Okay.
I have a cousin that's going to be setting that up. But we've mostly been dealing with women and men and teenagers. We've been going to different churches. Yes, even teenagers. Wow. Because teenagers have the drug and alcohol abuse, and also the sexually abused, and even the domestic violence, believe it or not. But we've been going to different churches, women's groups, or different organizations, passing this along. But we're going to be going to the prisons, and we want to get out there and go to like the different programs like Alpha House and the Spring and so on.
And have you seen? Tell me what it's like when you're doing the presentation. You're reliving it yourself. You kind of have to almost disconnect yourself from. And I know I saw you in your DVD, and you were amazing. But you speak with such raw emotion still, because I think even just now watching you tell this story, you do go back to some degree.
Oh yeah, I
do. Go through the pain again. But what's the reaction of the people that you present to after they see this? It's
very emotional. When I'm looking around and doing my presentation, I look around at the faces, and they're just bawling with tears, and they're wiping tears, and got their heads down. And we went to this church on November the 12th, and we had a young lady that actually ran out crying. Wow. And her mother had to run out behind her. So it's very, very emotional.
And I think it's powerful, because do you see where you actually connect and to those women? And like I'm surprised you mentioned the teenagers. I didn't even think about that segment. Yes. The population that goes down that far.
Right.
But also you've also gone back to school. That was a big part of you starting your new life. What did you went back to school to study what?
Theology.
And where are you at with your degree?
Well, I have my associate's degree. I got that in February this year, and I started back in April of this year to get my bachelor's degree in theology.
And you're beaming from ear to ear because you love it, don't you?
I love it, and I'll graduate in January 2013.
Right
getting
around the
my
corner.
bachelor's, yes, and I also graduated with summa cum laude.
So
I'm very proud.
And
very
that's
proud
just
of that.
amazing that you've done
Yes.
so much. And one of the other things that you pointed out is that you actually started your ministry and going public with your story. This is only about a year, within the past year or
Yes,
so.
just a year. I'm doing inspiration and motivational speaking on domestic violence and telling my story. I'm trying to get my story out there just to help. I have a heart and a passion to just help anybody of any type of abuse, but mostly domestic violence because I've been there.
If anyone either right now or when we post this up later tonight or tomorrow is going to listen to our broadcast, what is the one thing that you want to get across to them that if they're in this situation, what should they do and how can they get out?
I would first of all tell them to break the silence, to speak out and tell somebody, anybody. Don't make the mistake like I did and hide it, but tell somebody so that they can get help for you. There's counselors and advocates and shelters and programs and everything that you can go to and get help for you and your children. And I want to also tell them to be encouraged while you're surviving your domestic violence situation. It's so important for you to take care of yourself physically, emotionally, and spiritually every day to keep up your self-esteem. And also, it's much easier to make healthy decisions when we are mentally and emotionally healthy. You have to acknowledge the signs and the symptoms of domestic violence and realize that you need help. That's the most important step of getting out. But remember, you are not the first one, and you won't be the last one to find yourself in that situation. But it is very important to make healthy choices now for you and your children.
And that's just an amazing journey that you've been on. You continue to do your ministry as well, and we're going to have all that information up on our on the Docket fan page on Facebook, and we'll post that either, like I said, either tonight or tomorrow. Okay. Valerie, I can't thank you enough for coming in and sharing your story. I think it's so amazing and so inspirational to so many people. And I know it was hard for you to do, but I think, just starting this outreach and getting the message out there. And we see, and I know you'll agree with me, like Domestic Violence Awareness Month and domestic violence, certain events that are done. But, hearing your story and being able to connect with people so directly and personally, it just seems like that's so much more impactful than, a certain month set aside, because, as you said, this goes on every day.
Right.
And women and, people that are in relationships are going through this day in and day out. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the Docket.
Thank you for having me.
And going to give you a big hug.
Oh, thank you.
So, but thank you so much for coming in. Like I said, we'll post our full interview with Valerie up on our fan page, facebook.com/onthedocket. I'll also post it over on our YouTube channel, Felix Vega News, and also have some other information regarding domestic violence help that you can get and where you can go to get help. Remember, like Val said, if something's happened to you, say something, do something about it, because in the end, you don't know if you will survive. So, Val, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks again.
And we're going to continue right on with that. It was emotional first half hour. We're going to roll on to some of the other big stories of the day that we have going on here, not only in Tampa, but also across the country. Head over to our sports page, and once again, this week, law and sports are front and center in the headlines. And as we get started, we had breaking news earlier this afternoon that Penn State coach Jerry Sandusky had once again been charged with additional counts of child sexual abuse, according to the Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General. And this is, again, another situation like Val was talking about, where when you have abuse going on, you have to be careful and look for the certain signs. According to the Attorney General's office, this incident, the first two incidents that were reported today, and the grand jury actually investigated these and also recommended that charges be filed. Victim number 9, as you know, 8 victims have come forward so far. They're set for a preliminary hearing next week on the 13th. And these next 2 victims that came forward, one of them encountered Sandusky in 2004 when he was 11 or 12 years old, according to the press release from the Attorney General's office in Pennsylvania. Like the pattern of abuse that's been set forth already by the Attorney General's office, Sandusky repeatedly, according to the grand jury, took him to football games, gave him gifts and money. There were allegations that he took them to his house, and a progression of abuse that occurred across a certain period of time. 2 of the interesting points that that happened to both these boys, that there were acts of sexual abuse that were committed actually on Penn State property, and also in the State College area, a jacuzzi in a hotel, where several times Sandusky would bring these boys on 2 separate occasions. They have also described instances that happened in Sandusky's own house, where he would lure them to the basement, started with the wrestling, and eventually started sexually abusing them as well. The case of victim number 10, again, according to the Attorney General's press release, that happened in 1997 when the victim was 10 years old. Very similar, situation with that victim as well, involving the different places that they went to and the different places that Sandusky was abusing his victims, or his alleged victims, as I should say. Now, also in this story, another odd twist: the man cannot stop talking about this situation. Sandusky sat down over the weekend, or into the last Friday actually, and was released over the weekend with the New York Times in a 4-hour-long interview that spanned 2 days. New York Times reporter Joe Becker sat down with Sandusky, and she asked him a wide range of questions and asked him, basically in a free-for-all situation, how the allegations unfolded. How did he respond? He denied certain things. He denied being sexually attracted to boys, but then in a very awkward part of the interview, when asked about his now infamous interview with Bob Costas on Rock Center about 3 weeks ago, that he didn't understand the question and was basically reaching for the words to say and how to explain why he just didn't say no when Bob Costas asked him if he was sexually attracted to young boys. And interestingly enough, his attorney was also in the room and was also having to feed him answers on how to answer the questions that were being posed by the Times reporter. And some of the other things that Sandusky pointed out, that he was actually confronted by Tim Curley, who was one of the athletic directors at Penn State, who's also been charged in the indictment that was handed down by the grand jury in November with obstruction charges. And basically, it paints a clearer picture and also confirms a lot of what the grand jury found in their investigation. I'm sure we'll hear much more next week in the preliminary hearing about the number of times that people possibly turned a blind eye to what Sandusky was doing. So this is going to be interesting to see. Like I said, he was arrested on 2 more charges today, as recommended by the grand jury. As I predicted, probably going to be a lot more victims coming forward with different stories that Sandusky and different charges that Sandusky had allegedly abused them over the years. Now, one of the other things we want to get to, obviously, recap of our sports here in the Bay Area. The big story, USF fell to West Virginia. It was the last chance that they had in order to secure a bowl berth. This is the first time that USF will possibly not be going to the bowl as the bowl matchups shake out. They lost 30-27. The big goal of Skip Holtz, of course, this year was to win the Big East. They ended their season under 500 and only prevailed one time in their 7 Big East matchups. Louisville and West Virginia both capitalizing on their wins over USF to climb to the top of the Big East. Disappointing season, I would say, all around, and Sparks talk again if this is a rebuilding as opposed to poor coaching that is going on up at the school. And of course, LSU will take on Alabama in January for the national championship title in New Orleans, and that'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out as well. Talking now, going out over to the Bucks, they go down 38-19 against the Panthers Sunday here at home. They now stand at 4-8, one of their worst seasons in some years. Also raises the question again, just like with USF, that head coach Raheem Morris is in danger of losing his job, or will the Glazers and Mark Dominic stay with the quote-unquote rebuilding excuse in order to keep Morris on board? Other big question is whether Josh Freeman will start or Josh Johnson will start this week. Josh Freeman, over the past week or two, we heard that he supposedly injured his hand in practice. Later found out that she injured his hand while at a gun range from the recoil of the gun itself. But quite frankly, notwithstanding that situation, the Bucks fans are sick of the excuses and the lack of leadership that's being exhibited on the Bucks management's part, and we'll see where it goes and whether or not they can eke out any more victories in the end of the season. But one breakout star to talk about this season, whether you like it or not, and if you're a Gator fan or not, is Tim Tebow and the Broncos. Tebow is 6-1 with his starts this season, surviving the critics who wondered if Tebow will be able to follow through on his college career with the Gators. And I got to say, so far so good for Tebow. And the Packers remain undefeated in a neck-and-neck matchup with the Giants on Sunday. Since we can't watch the Bucks, and being a New Yorker at heart, I have to say the Giants came on strong against the Packers despite their losing record, and it was actually one of the better games I actually was able to watch this particular season. And as I said, also at the top of our broadcast, the other interesting story that's development in sports world, the FAMU hazing story. And before I get to that, one other point on the Sandusky story. The Pennsylvania court official said Tuesday that they will actually hold an online lottery beginning today, Wednesday at noon, in order to give out tickets for that preliminary hearing that's happening next week. And once again, I was amazed to see this because just like the Casey Anthony trial, I've done over 100 trials myself. Never had a line of people waiting to come in and watch a trial, but we saw with Casey Anthony, they had to auction off tickets, and not even auction off tickets, just do a lottery every day to keep control over the situation. They plan on doing the same for next week's hearing in State College, Pennsylvania as well. On to the FAMU hazing story. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement sent a letter to FAMU Friday asking the university to suspend its investigation at this point and also any disciplinary action against anyone involved in the death of drum major Robert Champion in Orlando. FDLE Commissioner Gerald Bailey cited the protection of, quote, objective investigative activities that have been initiated by law enforcement, including the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Governor Rick Scott has also expressed major concerns about the case against FAMU. Legal 101, hazing alone is a third-degree felony here in Florida, but their investigations may lead to murder or possibly manslaughter charges against some of the students involved if it's proven that the hazing act actually contributed to Champion's death. We have not had any release of any autopsy reports as of this time, and the investigation continues, as I pointed out. Let's switch gears to politics now for a couple of minutes. As we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, Herman Cain is out of the Republican primary race as of Saturday. Cain, in a very odd press conference at what was scheduled to be the opening of his Georgia campaign headquarters in Atlanta, Cain, backed by his wife Gloria, gave all indications he was staying in the race in the first minutes of the speech. Then, with a gasp from the hundreds in the crowd to hear him speak, Cain, quote, suspended his campaign. He made a point to say that he was at peace with himself, his God, and his wife. But Cain's departure, although expected by many political pundits and commentators, was quickly overshadowed by the latest poll results that started pouring out of Iowa and New Hampshire over the weekend. 3 separate polls, the Des Moines Register, an NBC News Marist poll, and an ABC News Washington poll as of last night, all have one thing in common. Newt Gingrich, the former House Speaker, labeled as controversial and arrogant by some of his own colleagues, has found his way into the hearts of Republican voters. For now, at least, just 30 days out from the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary. A couple of takeaways from those polls. According to the ABC News poll, likely caucus goers in Iowa are looking towards Gingrich's experience in Congress as the best measure of handling the economy and simply becoming president. The NBC News poll and the Des Moines Register poll both found similar results. As much as Republicans try to run as outsiders and being outside the Beltway candidates, voters are running towards Gingrich in all of these polls. The other two big questions that are going to be answered in the next couple of weeks: where will Herman Cain's supporters go? He announced during his press conference that he would be endorsing one of the other candidates for the Republican primary or the Republican nomination for president. And the other big question that's been raised already, will Gingrich's volatile past in Congress come back to haunt him as well? An NBC News story that aired last night detailed some of the things that the controversies Gingrich had while he was Speaker of the House, the arguments he had with other members of his party, and also the fact that there was a time where he barely was reelected Speaker and then was essentially forced out of office. Of course, he led the charge against Bill Clinton's impeachment back in 1998. So a lot of dynamics going into the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primaries. That's just the first of the primary election season. Here in Florida, the Republican primary is set for January 31st. Now we come to my favorite part of our show. You can't make this stuff up. The legal insanity from across the country and around the world. It's all coming up in just a minute. Want to remind you that you're listening to On the Docket on WMNF 88.5 HD4. You can listen to us online at hawkradio.com and also on WMNF.org. Just click on their HD4 link and you will find us each and every week, starting again in January. But again, in our last segment of You Can't Make This Stuff Up, we see amazing and unusual stories in court every day as prosecutors or defense attorneys, and it never surprises me every week when I write this segment that there is no end to the legal insanity that goes on around the world, good, bad, and just plain strange. So let's get started. We begin with a tragic and serious story from Laredo, Texas, triggered by the economic divide that is so prevalent in this country. According to the Laredo police officials, a woman shot her 10-year-old son and 12-year-old daughter on Monday, then shot and killed herself outside a government welfare office located in the city. She was apparently denied welfare benefits, which led to a 7-hour standoff with police before the tragic end. Police say she took one worker hostage, and in the middle of trying to talk her out of the building, 3 gunshots were fired from inside. No word yet on why she was denied assistance. Her children were still in a San Antonio hospital as of Tuesday night. Over to Santa Ana, California, the district attorney's office on Friday announced they were charging 17-year-old Gladys Remigio in the attempted gang kidnapping, of her roommate's 15-day-old baby. According to the press release from the DA's office, Remigio, along with the 2 alleged gang members, hatched the plan on November 28th. The next day, on the 29th, using what has been described as a, quote, replica firearm from the press release from the DA's office, the trio stormed into the apartment, took the baby from the victim, who was being named by officials only right now as Norma N., presumably another juvenile. The 2 gang members fled the scene, and luckily Norma N. was able to grab her baby back from Remigio amongst all the chaos that was going on. The DA's office said that all 3, if convicted, do face life in prison. Up to Queens, New York now. A frightening scene unfolded on a city bus on Friday night. New York 1 and the New York City Police report that Demel Burton opened fire on the Q111 bus line as it was headed to the main transportation hub of Jamaica Station, that's in Jamaica, Queens. 1 person was killed on the bus, another was shot in the jaw. Luckily, the alert bus driver got everyone else off the bus, but police say more people would have been killed except the fact that Burton's gun jammed. But these weren't Burton's first victims that night. 20 minutes before the bus rampage, Burton allegedly shot and killed his girlfriend's 18-year-old son, Keith Murrell, at a Queens apartment. Burton was taken into custody on Saturday and faces 25 years to life in prison. Here in Florida, 2 unusual murder cases unfolded over the weekend. In Spring Hill, John Katsimedes and Dana Nelson were killed, according to authorities, by Craig Lead, beaten to death over an apparent drug debt involving prescription pills. And I've talked about this before. One of the other fallouts of prescription pill abuse is violent crimes. The Hernando County Sheriff's Office says Lee drove to Katsimedes' mother's house, telling her that her son was in the hospital and needed money. Investigators later learned that Dana Nelson's body was actually in the trunk of that car when Lead went to Katsimedes' mother's house. This is another example, like I said, of how drug abuse can possibly lead to many other violent crimes, including burglary, robbery, and even murder. Another issue we will tackle on the docket in 2012. Now down to Sarasota, another bizarre murder caught on tape at a library. The Sarasota County Sheriff's Office arrested Charles L. Hill on Saturday after a witness told him Hill admitted shooting and killing 49-year-old James Brotherton. Excuse me. The witness told the sheriff's office that Hill shot Brotherton because he was, quote, mouthing off to him when Brotherton wouldn't get in the trunk of the car. Many more details will come as the weeks go on. Interesting note on this story, a new Florida law passed in the wake of the on-camera killing of officers Jeff Kokab and Dave Curtis will prevent the release of that video to the media of Brotherton being killed. Kokab and Curtis, their death captured, unfortunately, on the dash cam video of one of their police cars. And two funny stories to round out our show tonight, and actually for 2011. First to the Garden State and Medford, New Jersey, where the city's mayor resigned Tuesday amid allegations not of corruption or any political treachery. Nope, they jilted a male prostitute. Another reason why you don't post pictures of yourself on the web in compromising positions, like those posted of Mayor Chris Myers lying in a bed in some blue Calvin Klein briefs on said male prostitute's website, dedicated to sharing the photo with the world, according to an ABC News report. Myers' only public response, aside from his glowing resignation letter, was saying the internet was a, quote, murky and anonymous place. Ironic that you used the word anonymous, especially if you were going to carry out such an affair as a public official, and not be honest about your feelings towards other men, the two allegedly met on rentboy.com. And finally, back to Harlem tonight, and a naked man rolling through the streets, literally. Two NYPD officers were injured last Friday trying to chase down a naked guy who, according to eyewitnesses, threatened to kill someone when they got on the scene. That happened at 145th Street. They literally found the naked man rolling around on the pavement. Despite one cop having a head injury, New York Post reports that naked rolling man, as he's been described, was also injured. Rolling naked on the pavement can leave a scar or two, I imagine, and we'll leave it there. You wonder why I love being a prosecutor and a journalist. It's stories like these and why you can't make this stuff up. So that's going to do it for me on this December 7th edition of On the Docket. We want to tell you that we are going to be off for the next couple of weeks as school here, our studios here at HCC are going to be closed and everyone takes a nice holiday vacation. But I want to remind you, check us out over on Facebook.com/OnTheDocket. I'll be posting some of my story ideas for 2012 that we have coming up. Also have some of my web polls that I've had up there that you guys have responded to, which I appreciate greatly. We'll be back on January 4th in the new year, working on a lot of great shows. And I have to say this before I go. 1 year ago, someone asked me if I was going to have my own radio show or be a legal analyst on TV while still balancing my career as a prosecutor and becoming an adjunct professor here at HCC and my active lecture schedule. Yes, folks, I do a lot. And my catering, yeah, I forgot about that. I would have said you're absolutely nuts. I leave you all with this thought tonight, especially on the heels of everything Val Miller taught us tonight about survival. There's another life waiting for all of us at any given moment. It could be your career, your personal life, your love life, anything. The greatest lesson I've learned this year was to let go and be yourself. I also learned that every one of us has a purpose, a passion, and a platform. Capitalize on that, and most importantly, share it with others. We'll see you back here on the docket in the new year.